maybe just to start off, would you like to talk to your background as an industrial designer and maybe what inspired you to take the career path as an industrial designer?
Sure. So I'm an industrial designer based in San Francisco. I have over a decade of experience in designing technology products with many innovative companies around Silicon Valley and elsewhere in the world. I I was previously a partner at one of the top design studios in Silicon Valley called Bould Design, and you might know them for work such as the Nest thermostat, GoPro cameras, and Roku streaming devices. Um, I recently, as of last year, left that company and decided to go independent. And as of last year, I've been operating independently as an industrial designer, continuing to work in the technology space. Um, in the past 10 years, I've done lots of different kinds of products, some consumer, some enterprise products, some robotics, food technology, really all over the place.
It's
So
great to
my
have variety.
interest, yeah, my interest is mainly in technology products, and I really think that the thoughtful use of technology can really improve and benefit people's lives. Um, your other question was um,
What
how,
inspired you just to become an industrial designer?
yeah, so I actually grew up in Hong Kong, and I went to a school that followed the British curriculum. I went to an international English school, and I was lucky enough that as part of that curriculum, they have a subject called design and technology. And I had some great teachers. I was exposed to the idea of being an industrial designer pretty young. I think a lot of people uh, aren't so fortunate. They only find out about it before college or after college sometimes. So I found out about it when I was like 15 or something.
Mm.
And when I found out that there was a job where you could draw and make models and design things and make things, that was kind of it. There
Mm.
was there was no turning back for me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I had a similar experience. We have a version of that subject in Australia called graphics. Well, I think it's called something different now, but and it's basically just like graphic design, industrial design, architecture, all that kind of stuff combined. And of all the subjects at school, I think that was the one I liked the most, and that was kind of what took me down that path. But yeah, it's funny how at a school level you can really get that taste for design if you have the foundation. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's an important subject for kids to get exposed to, so that
Yeah.
they have some idea of the potential of a creative career path.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. What are the most significant projects you've worked on in your career? What are some of the biggest challenges you have faced during these projects?
Some of the most significant projects I would say are I worked on a computational camera called the Light L16. It was a camera with 16 small lenses in it that could create a picture that was very high quality. And also, it captured 3D data so that you could do some post processing adjustment. And this was before most phones had like two or three cameras in
Hmm.
them. So this technology was really quite new, but the concept is very similar. It's,
Hmm.
using more cameras to capture more
Capture
data.
different data, yeah.
So that was one of the most technically complex projects that I've ever worked on, and lots of challenges from, how to cram all of that stuff inside a housing that was still an acceptable size, and balancing the engineering requirements with the aesthetics,
Hmm.
trying to make it, trying to make sure that I was working with the engineers to support the function, but not just, let the function totally dictate the user experience or the ergonomics or the aesthetics. And then as part of that project, I also got to travel to China a lot, and I saw really for the first time how the sausage is made, like really being on the factory floor, seeing the parts get molded, seeing them come off the line, talking with people. And I speak decent enough Mandarin Chinese, so communicating with people directly that were making the products
Mm,
and understanding what their concerns were, and just a whole different culture of working in a factory overseas compared to a design studio in San Francisco. So I really learned a lot from that project, and every challenge I think was a an opportunity to learn more about industrial design, learn more about working with people, and also learn about how products are made.
mm. Yeah, I think that's very important. Like actually going to the uh manufacturing plants and working out how things are done, not just from a technical level, not just from a software level, but actually from like a physical level. Because I feel like if you're on the space, it's a lot easier to design for it if you know how it's being done on the spot, especially at scale
Yeah,
as well. Like especially with injection molding, I think a lot of like students, you can only learn so much from like watching YouTube videos, but you need to actually be on site to observe it.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I believe that you have recently made a career move, as you mentioned, you're moving into more of a freelance work environment, if I understand correctly.
Yeah, I don't like to refer to it as a freelance gig because it's really not a freelance gig.
Mm.
Freelancer, at least in some uses of the word, sort of implies like someone that gets contract work from like a studio or another company, and
Yeah.
you're kind of whenever you are needed, you get a call, and then you have an hourly rate, and you do the work and you get paid. But
Mm.
really, I I see myself more as a independent designer, or perhaps a one person agency, because I'm going out to get the clients. I talk to the clients, I scope the projects, I sell the work, and I also do the work.
Mm.
So I'm sort of a more of a one man agency than a freelancer. And I think freelancer, rightly or wrongly, comes with some connotations of being, you know, low cost, or less less stability, or
Mm.
perhaps um you kind of your clients can kind of turn you on and off like a tap. And I'm really trying to work on more of a project basis,
Mm.
do whole end to end product development, and not do kind of piecemeal freelance work.
Yep.
Not to say that there's anything wrong with that, like
Mm.
everyone has different needs in their career, everyone's
Mm.
at a different stage. So it might make sense for someone to be doing work like that. And it's a great way to gain experience because you get exposed to a lot of different kinds of
Mm.
jobs and different companies, depending on how many companies you freelance with. But yeah, that's that's like a little bit of a semantic difference that I would point out.
What type of organizations are you looking to and projects are you looking to be a part of with your activities?
So really, it's in line with what I said earlier. It's technology
Yep.
companies and companies looking to ship products that involve some kind of novel technology, that has to have some kind of user experience figured out, has some sort of aesthetic requirement, maybe has some complex functionality that needs to integrate with those aforementioned um, parts of the product. So it's really kind of technological products that I can really sink my teeth into and design around.
Mm. Okay. Um, your blog style post on LinkedIn is actually why I originally found out about you. I remember when I was a student, I used to follow along, and some of the insights were really interesting. How did that come about? How did you end up getting into that?
Well, last year when I was transitioning out of my partnership partnership position at Bould Design, I kind of realized that, in the internet age, there are all these platforms that you can broadcast yourself on. And, back in the day, maybe 10, 20 years ago, you kind of needed to be a famous designer to have your name out there.
Yeah.
But now you can just be, you can be anyone, and you can be broadcasting yourself on these platforms like LinkedIn, Instagram, etc. So I saw an opportunity for myself to put myself out there, because also I had been working at a company for 10 years. It's a company that I'm very proud of, and I feel like I contributed a lot to. But at the end of the day, I needed people. If I was to survive on my own, I
Mm.
also needed people to know my name.
Mm.
And another thing that was happening on the internet is that, you know, again, like maybe 10, 20 years ago, like people really only cared about celebrities and, you know, famous people, like people that are top of their field. And you know, I am none of those things. I'm not a celebrity. But another trend that's happening on the internet is that content creators are rising up from just being normal people.
Mm.
Like any normal person can say something, or have a message, and if it connects with people, people will pay attention,
Yeah.
and they'll also get to know you. And that, you know probably in the early 2000s, if you told someone like, oh, like in 20 years people are going to be like pointing cameras at themselves and like, talking about,
Mm.
you know oat milk or whatever, and these are just going to be normal people with other jobs, and they're just going to be talking into their phones,
Mm.
which are going to have amazing cameras in them, and like thousands or hundreds of thousands or even millions of people are going to be listening to them talk about oat milk
The
or
concept of
whatever.
TikTok is crazy. Like it's just these
Yeah,
couple of minute clips that people just scroll through it endlessly. It's
yeah.
crazy.
And it's the same thing on LinkedIn or
Mm.
Instagram. You're just putting your message out there, and if you know what you're talking about, if you have something to talk about, and I did have something to talk about. I had been an industrial designer for 10 years, so I kind of knew what industrial designers were interested in. And I had a need to sort of put myself out there so that I could start not just getting work, but also to connect with the design community and to have interesting conversations with people like yourself, and also to kind of share what I'd learned along the way. And at first, I really had no expectation. I was just, I was looking at other people that were doing it, other people on LinkedIn and other people on Twitter and Instagram, and I was like, well, if they can do it, why not me?
Mm.
I'll give it a shot. So I put some stuff out there. I just was consistent with it. Some of the early stuff was probably pretty bad, but over time, just by posting every day for a few months, people started to take notice, and people started to tell me that they found my content interesting, they found it valuable, and people are reaching out to me to get advice, to talk, have conversations, just to connect, and sometimes even offer me business and work that I could actually make money from.
Mm.
So yeah, it was all a big experiment, and it kind of paid off. So that's how it started, and that's how it's continuing.
Mm. I think even for students as well, like there's a bit of a disconnect between student life and professional life. And I feel like a lot of students feel like they don't really like have the um they don't have like everything they need to get into professional life. But I feel like a lot of your posts, like when I read them, I was like, oh, I just need to hear this right now. Like it's like I'm trying to think of a specific one. I think one about like portfolios I was reading, and I was like, oh, this is exactly what I need to hear. Like it's good information for someone who's writing their portfolio up. Um, and yeah, so I feel like in that way, like a lot of students probably are in the same boat as me, and they like your little like some like for you it probably doesn't take that much time, but like the effect it would have on the community is a lot more than the time you're taking. Mm,
Yeah, and I think back to when I was a student, there were no, obviously Twitter was a thing, Instagram was a thing, but it wasn't sort of this community of people exchanging information.
mm,
And I was in the same boat. I didn't have a lot of information about what professionals really wanted to see from me. Like, I feel like I was barking up the wrong tree a lot of the time. My professors, as much as they tried, they were not particularly plugged into the industry anymore.
mm,
And there was not a lot of sound career advice or just help in getting a job,
mm,
even at my design school, which was supposedly one of the top design schools in the country. And if that's the situation at one of the top design schools, then every other school must be struggling as well.
mm. Yeah. Yeah, no, I think there is a bit of a disconnect between teachers who have the career knowledge and don't. But in my university, they all were pretty up to date with career knowledge. But I think still there is like it's very competitive design, and I feel like you're not really like kind of prepared for how competitive it is necessarily in university. Like they're like, oh, it's all right, find like what you like and like make a job out of it. But I think maybe like sometimes like more realistic knowledge would be better, like actually
Yeah.
just preparing students for like it's going to be hard, you're going to have to like do things that you don't want to do to get there, because like you can't just do what you want to do because there isn't always going to be a job for it, kind of thing. Like it'd be, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And one thing I try to do is give specific tips and specific knowledge, like not trying to talk about things in like these generalities.
Mm,
I'm trying to tell you specifically what I think and what I think professionals are looking for and
mm,
how students can make themselves more marketable. Um, that's not to say I'm like the authority on everything. Like people should always do their own research and
mm,
figure it out for themselves. But hopefully, I'm adding useful information to the mix.
mm. Yeah, cool. What topics do you usually cover in your posts, like in general, or maybe what are the ones that had the most um were best received by the community?
My I don't have really a very specific niche.
Mm,
I mean, the one thing that connects all of my content is design.
yeah.
So it's always going to be about design in some way. I think the things that tend to resonate the most with people in the community are portfolio tips and like career advice for students or young professionals. And I think that's just because of how hungry people are for that
Mm,
kind of information. Because
mm,
when you're in that situation, you're really trying to gather as much insight as you can so you can put your best foot forward. So
yeah, definitely.
naturally that stuff plays the best. I also just write about my own experiences sometimes, and sometimes that'll strike a chord with some random people. Um, Another thing that I think plays well is like just observations about design or design around us, in the world around us. People, even non-designers, get interested by stuff like that. Like I did a post about a toothbrush that I found, and I think that's like one of my top performing posts because people just, most people walk through the world not really thinking that much about the stuff around them. So,
Mm,
when they see something when they see something on LinkedIn that makes them think
mm,
a little bit more deeply about the physical world around them, sometimes that can be interesting.
mm. Yeah, I think to someone who's not a designer, it's really weird to start thinking about like everything around them like that, like in that way, like picking up an object, thinking about how it was made, thinking about why it was made like that, what like process was taken to think to bring that into fruition. Like to a
Yeah.
non-designer, that sounds like some very dystopian concept, but to a designer, it just seems like normal. And I feel like when you start moving towards that thinking, even as a student, then your designs really improve because you start thinking about things in more depth.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true because design is not just about the doing, it's also about the observing, it's about, insights about human behavior and
Mm,
how people interact with objects and information. So just observing the world around you and consciously taking notes in your head about why things are the way they are, or what what about certain objects uh, is appealing to you or not appealing to you, or why something, why you really love using this thing and not that thing. Those
mm,
are all very important observations that people, designers, hopefully are making.
mm, yeah. Over the course of your career, how have you absorbed, how have you observed design evolving?
So I think specifically in my product categories and in the stuff that I've worked on, it is the merging of the physical and the digital experiences.
Mm,
Like when when I started, it was just starting to become very common that most things, most electronics that you would buy would have some kind of app that came with it.
mm,
And more and more things now have that, even like very basic stuff. Everything has an app. But also, more and more hardware products are incorporating some sort of digital interface.
mm,
Like, your car has a touch screen, your coffee maker might have a touch screen these days.
mm,
So I think the big trend is the merging of physical and digital design and the erosion of the barrier between them, which makes it so much more valuable and so much more uh, important for industrial designers to also understand digital design,
mm,
and for digital designers to have some understanding of what physical design is. So I think that's the big trend. I think over the past few years, there's been more. I mean, every few years, this question of sustainability
mm,
comes up, and then people get all excited about it. And then eventually it sort of disappears into a sea of greenwashing. But it does seem like these days people are more serious about it. Like
mm,
brands are more serious about it. Like very big brands are actually incorporating it into their products. Like, how do you design for circularity, designing for repair?
mm,
There's also more legislation around those kinds of things. Like, you know, in Europe, especially, like things, I think the right to repair has made it a lot further than in the US.
mm,
But, these things are important for designers and non-designers to consider as we continue to design and make things, because we can't just expect to continue putting stuff out into the world without any consequence.
mm.
Um,
Have you been put into that situation in your career? Because I mean, I don't want to overgeneralize, but I feel like consumer electronics is probably one of the biggest contributors to e-waste. Well, to not e-waste, to waste in general, like in the product design space. Have you been put into a situation where you have to basically not take a job because it's going to be like inherently terrible for the environment, like a single use product, or is that not something that you generally consider in your practice?
for me personally, that, as my own business, that hasn't come up yet. I've only been
Yep.
doing it for a few months, but in my past company, we did turn down things that we didn't think needed to exist,
Yeah.
and like tchotchkes and like little things that were one-time use. Like, we didn't tend to do products like that. We did products that we felt really added value to people's lives and had some, decently long lifespan. And we didn't want to be just putting junk out into the world. And
Yeah.
one way that you can do that is by working on things that last a really long time. Like
Mm.
I have a Nest thermostat on my wall that's over 10 years old.
Yeah.
So that's a
Mm.
piece of electronics, consumer electronics that, consumer electronics usually have a lifespan of like 2 years,
Mm.
but that's been on my wall for 10 years. So
Mm.
that
Yeah.
that is one way to approach sustainability.
Yeah. Yeah, I think like with these days with sustainability, people get too hung up in the fact that everything needs to be recyclable. I mean, it is good to make things recyclable, but I feel like that's one thing that people don't think about is just creating products that just last longer is inherently going to make the products more sustainable because they're going to last longer. Whereas like if you just only focus on things that are biodegradable, it could actually have a detriment to the industry, because the products just wouldn't last longer and then you got to make more of them. So I feel like it's
Yeah.
like kind of leveraging the both of them. Like for example, like you've got like film cameras. This one's like 90s and it still works perfectly.
Yeah.
Whereas like these days a modern like DSLR could last. I don't think like not all like some of them wouldn't even last 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And also, if you make everything biodegradable, that's not necessarily the answer because what what you also have to consider is the system around
yeah.
that product. Like just because it is biodegradable doesn't mean it's going to be,
Mm,
put into the right processing facility to get turned back into biomaterial.
yeah.
It's highly likely that it's just going to end up in the landfill like everything
Mm,
else where things don't biodegrade. So, I think companies are thinking a lot more about end of life and
mm,
how things get taken back in or, recycled or repurposed as part of the product's ecosystem, not just
mm.
as a problem that someone else in a far off country has to deal with.
Yeah, exactly. This comes back to the concept of greenwashing, I suppose. Like in Australia here, we used to send all of our recycling to China to get
Yeah.
them to recycle it, and then like
Yeah.
China was like, we're not taking it anymore. So then like
Yeah.
now almost like I think 20% of our recycling is recycled, and the rest of it just goes into landfill. Don't quote me on those statistics because it might have changed, but I know a couple of years ago when I looked, that was what it was, and it's just like what is
Yeah.
the point of even recycling if it's most of it's just going to go into landfill anyway? It's just crazy.
Yeah. It's the same in America.
Yeah. So like this is what you're talking. It's a system-wide issue. It's not necessarily a product issue. And yeah, like a lot of these, I think the problem with the modern sustainability movement is a lot of the time they act like it's the consumer's fault. And like I feel like a lot of the time it's not necessarily the consumer's fault. It's like on a larger scale than the consumer. It's the businesses, it's the governments, it's the people setting up these like logistics systems for like sustainability.
Yeah.
That's like more that's gonna have more of an impact on the consumer and like
Yeah.
the decisions of the consumer than like a pure decision of the consumer whether they buy that or not.
Yeah. If it's really going to change, it can't be left up to the individual decisions of billions of people.
Yeah,
It has to be, it has to be something bigger than that.
exactly. Yeah, no, I think sustainability is a bit of a rabbit hole you can go down and like you find that it's a very hard decision at the end on what to do. Hmm.
Yeah.
As in terms of key trends in industrial design that are shaping the industry right now, what trends and technologies do you think that designers really need to watch out for in order to stay up to date in the future?
Well, the obvious one is AI. That's the, you know, elephant in the room. I personally don't think AI is going to replace designers anytime soon
Yeah.
because right now it has AI has very limited the AI image making tools like Midjourney or Dolly or something like that. They have very limited understanding of the external context. They
Mm,
don't understand ergonomics, they don't understand the user, they don't understand any of that stuff. What they are good for is crunching lots of visual data and spitting out, decent options depending on how you control it. Uh, but it's not it's not very steerable.
mm,
Like you can't really control it that finely. And I think the people that get really, or some people that get really drawn to those kinds of tools are people that were not creative to begin with. Like they didn't know how
Mm,
to draw, they don't know how to like, manipulate visual aesthetics on their own. So they found this tool that works really well to sort of spit out ideas for them. But I think a lot of designers actually, like myself, might find that using these tools is they're pretty frustrating because
mm,
they never quite do what you want. And it's really hard to say control it. I mean, it is getting better all the time.
mm.
And a year ago or 6 months ago, nobody dreamed that we would be where we are now. So
That's the crazy thing I'm finding is the speed at which things are changing.
yeah, yeah. So I think, the people that say, oh, it's all doom and gloom, like these robots are going to take your design jobs within the next year, that's probably not going to happen.
Mm,
But I do think these tools, in one way or another, are going to make their way into a design workflow. And it's probably at first going to most impact those stages of the process where you're crunching a lot of data and trying to generate a lot of output quickly. So I think the important thing for designers is to be aware of these tools,
mm,
to experiment with them, to try them out. Don't rely on them. Like, I think you still need, at least right now, you need to sort of be the art director.
mm,
And in order to do that, you need to have strong design fundamentals. Like, you need to
mm.
understand form, you need to understand proportion, like color, material,
Even history,
ergonomics.
I was thinking, even design history is very important.
Yeah, even
Understand.
design history, because
Yeah.
you need to know, whether something you're doing with AI is looking like, whether it's just a complete ripoff of something else, or
Mm,
whether it looks modern or like retro. Is it deliberately retro?
mm,
What are you what are you actually trying to achieve with the tool? So I think there is value to trying the tools and to keeping up to date with them. I can't, I can't predict where we'll be in another 6 months.
mm,
At least right now, I don't think they're taking over our industry fully,
mm,
but I do see them as part of the future of design. I just don't quite know what yet, like how they're going to integrate
mm.
fully.
Obviously, this is a bit past our both. I think both of our what's it called, career. But basically, when like I've heard when CAD came out, it was kind of like you either adopt it or you fall behind. Like some of the people didn't adopt it, and they really struggled to stay relevant because they were doing everything by hand. And then there's some the people who did adopt it kind of move forward. And I feel like it's potential that it could be like that with AI at some point. Like if you don't like, it's not like it's going to take your job, but if you don't, if you're like, no, I'm not going to use it. I only use the traditional industrial design, techniques, and then someone else adopts it. They're going to have like a head up against you. Like I think that could be a possible future.
Yeah, absolutely. I think CAD is a good analogy. I think, you know, Keyshot and other fast rendering
Mm,
software is a good analogy. Like, you know, marker rendering is almost a obsolete skill at this point.
mm,
I mean, some people still do it because they enjoy it, because it gives their work a little bit of flair, but you can visualize things so quickly in 3D now.
mm.
That's also been I think, a fundamental change to the industry.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I suppose it's kind of sad, but like when things progress, some things get left behind. And like what is defined as an industrial designer does evolve to some degree over time. Hmm. In terms of VR, do you think VR is going to become integral in design? I think like in terms of industrial design, I feel like you can definitely see where it could fit into like someone's creative process, especially from a remote working perspective. But yeah, what are your thoughts on it?
I think VR is very useful for some certain projects, like
Mm,
things that have to be full scale. I've used VR in several professional projects for big stuff like big robots or like big, you know, building scale type stuff. And it's gotten so good, and like, Keyshot has an amazing VR plugin.
mm,
You can really feel like you're immersed in the world and standing next to what you've designed. I think I haven't experimented with other, VR generation tools like what's that tool called? Gravity
that's
Sketch.
true.
But I have seen other designers use it to great effect. Like
Mm,
they're sketching out designs in VR and
mm,
then taking them into CAD after that. And I think, these are all tools. They
mm,
all just help you get closer to the process, to what you're doing. And I think if it fits in with your process, then you should absolutely dive into it and use
mm,
it however you see fit. I think it definitely helps to expose yourself to as many of those tools as you can as a young professional, because you might end up using it as part of your job, or it might be a very marketable skill for you.
mm.
Like if you wanted to work in transportation design or something, like I think Gravity Sketch is becoming quite a useful tool
Even
in
footwear
that
design as well.
yeah, product category.
Mm,
So those are, they're definitely, I think VR is a very valuable tool, but it kind of depends on what you're doing. Like
mm,
if you're doing like consumer electronics that kind of sit on a desktop, there's not a huge ton of value to
mm.
seeing that. I think it's better to just do a 3D print and then put it on your desk.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I think
yeah.
for more consumer electronics and yeah, smaller product design categories, apart from shoes, because for some reason for shoes it seems to work really well. I think that we'll probably still stick with like things like Rhino and things like that for more paramet for more free flowing
Yeah.
surface finishes, because I think that it's just never going to get to the point where you could actually manufacture the things that are in there.
Yeah, I don't think you would use them as
Yeah.
a tool to create manufacturable designs, but
Mm,
you can capture like the emotion or the gesture of
mm,
something and then use CAD tools like Rhino or SolidWorks
mm.
to then translate those gestures into real designs.
Yeah. Do you think that it's going to open up possibilities for remote work within the field? Because currently, industrial design is not really many people doing successful remote work. It's generally seen as something you would do in person.
I think remote work is here to stay, obviously, after
Yeah.
the pandemic. I think for industrial designers and other physical disciplines like mechanical engineering or something, it does pose some challenges, like
Mm,
not being able to just gather around the same object and
mm,
discuss it. I think VR certainly can be a tool to be used there. I think there will be, more hybrid approaches to doing design, and I think many companies, my own included, when I was still at Bould Design, we found that you actually need to meet in person less than you think.
mm,
You just need to meet to review prototypes and look at things physically. Uh, but I would say that just because you can do it doesn't mean you have to or you
mm,
should do it. I actually prefer working in person with people.
mm,
It's more fun. It
mm,
feels like you're actually connecting with people. It's not like there's always this screen behind you or between you.
mm,
So I think there'll definitely be more remote and hybrid opportunities for industrial designers these days, but whether you take them on is really a matter of personal preference, I think.
mm. Yeah, I think it could be interesting, but in the future, like for example, me flying to you isn't necessarily the easiest venture, because of the distance. So like we could collaborate over the internet easily with VR, well, easier than before, like previously with a phone call. Um, I think for something like that, it could really open up. But yeah, I see what you mean. Like if you have the option, it's definitely better to be in person. Mm.
Yeah.
What is some advice you'd give to young designers who are trying to land their first consultancy gig, or maybe even just any design gig in general? And what are some skills or qualities that they should focus on developing?
So I think my one big piece of advice for young designers trying to get their first job is really be specific about what you're targeting, who you're targeting, what is it that they do, what's their design aesthetic, what does their process look like, what kinds of marketing materials do they put out there, and then try as best as you can to make your work match that kind of work.
Mm,
You need to basically put their website next to your portfolio, and you need to convincingly be able to fit in to that lineup. So if someone were to come by and look at their website and your portfolio, it needs to be within the realm of believability that you could work there
mm,
and you could do this kind of work, because that is what design people who are hiring designers, that's what they're looking for.
mm,
They're looking at the kind of work that they do every day, and they're trying to see, can you do that kind of work?
mm,
So this is something that I think students need to kind of have a mindset shift on. A lot of times when I was reviewing portfolios, I would see work that was very much clearly driven by their specific program or their own specific interests, but it didn't look like anything that our company was doing
mm,
on a daily basis. So I think the mindset shift is you need to look externally and you need to look at your work from the outside in,
mm,
and you can't just look at your work from the inside out, like this is what my school told me to do, this is what I thought was interesting. You need to look at these companies that you want to work at and say, what are they looking for, and really try to understand that and then push your work in that direction.
mm. Yeah, I feel like, well, I mean, from your experience, if you hire someone who doesn't line up with that, like they might not necessarily communicate the values or even the design aesthetic that these consultancy is operating under. Mm,
Yeah, hiring is always a risk. People might not work out. It's expensive to hire people. Turnover is expensive. So if I'm hiring, I'm really going to look for the person that represents the lowest risk. And that usually means the person that does work the most similar to what I'm doing on a daily
mm.
basis.
Yeah. I feel like one thing I've noticed as well, a lot of organizations, specifically, I don't know if it's the same overseas, but in Australia, are looking for people who are going to be able to work for many years and not just like leave after 6 months to a year. Because I feel like with design, there's like the trap, like everyone wants to constantly, level up in design and become a better designer and get as much experience as they can. But like a lot of organizations, they don't want people to just like, as you're saying, the hiring process is hard. They don't want to be hiring designers every 6 months to a year. So I think communicating that you're gonna really put some time in, stick around and work hard in the organization, like really organizations like that.
Yeah. At the same time, though, there are no guarantees.
Mm, yeah.
Like, at least in the US, it's employment at will. Like
Mm,
you can say you're going to be there for 2 years, but you can leave after 2 days
yeah.
if you wanted to. I'm not sure how it is in Australia, but you know, I think there needs to be a reasonable expectation on both sides that, like, I'm gonna, me as the applicant, I'm gonna stick around long enough to learn and make an impact.
Mm,
And also on the employer side, there needs to be some offering as well. Like, I'm going to give you development opportunities and I'm going to
mm,
teach you things so that you can be a valuable member of the organization for, like,
mm,
at least 1 or 2 years. I would say
mm.
that's kind of a minimum to
Yeah.
make
Yeah,
real
exactly.
impact.
Yeah. What are some skills that you see designers lacking in your professional practice, and maybe when you were hiring, when you see young designers getting into the industry, what are they missing?
I think I think a lot of designers, myself included, when I started my career, they are lacking in form development. I think a lot of emphasis in design education over the last 10, 20 years has shifted over to research and problem solving and sort of design thinking type of stuff. And a lot of the aesthetics and form development and the beauty side of things has
Mm,
maybe gotten lost. And that was definitely true of my education and my
mm,
work. So when I got into this company and started doing real design work, I found out how much I was lacking in that department and how much I had to learn just by
mm,
working with professional designers. So I think people need to not only focus on the problem solving, they also need to focus on the aesthetics, the marketability, and the just the beauty
mm,
of objects. Um, Another thing that I think young designers really need to focus on is uh, working with other disciplines. A lot of times, as a designer, you're working with engineers and people who work in marketing and business people. I think you're so immersed in design and design school, like you kind of forget how to talk to other people.
mm,
And I think one of the things that I really learned in the first few years of my career is like really understanding what other people's problems are. Like it's the same as a design process. When you're working with people, you have to understand them, as if they're the user.
mm,
They're the user of your design work.
yeah,
You need to understand what they care about, what the problems they face are, and how you can talk to them and communicate the value of what you do.
mm,
So it's not just about doing great design work and kind of putting it out there and saying, like, here it is. It's really about collaborating with people and talking to people and understanding their needs and then being able to talk about the value of what you're doing in terms that they'll understand.
mm,
So I think those are kind of big areas that students and young professionals could focus on.
yeah. I mean, it always comes back to that communicating the value of design. I feel like that's like something that's always mentioned on my podcast. And I mean, you'd think at this point we've like beat that battle, after all these people who've come before us who've been fighting that fight, but there's still people out there who don't see the value of design. So I
Yeah.
suppose like telling like the next generation, like even my generation coming into design, we need to continue to like kind of convince people of the value. And like the only way we can convince that is by doing good work and showing the success of our work.
Yeah. And I don't think that's ever going to end. Like it's never
Mm,
going to be a job that's going to be done.
mm,
Like any profession, any skill set, you need to go around telling people why it matters.
yeah.
Like, you know, I used to do all my own taxes. I didn't know
Mm,
why anyone would bother having an accountant. But then I started being part of a business. And then, like, the value of an accountant
mm,
became very clear to me.
yeah,
And I didn't have that mindset before, but now I gladly pay an accountant to do my taxes for me. So
exactly.
it's the same thing. Like, as a designer, you can't just go around expecting people to just understand what it is you do and
Mm,
why it matters. You need to actually inform them and give them the time to get educated and come around to your way of seeing things.
mm,
And you also need to understand what they're about and you need to sort of absorb what their way of seeing things as well.
mm. Yeah, and what value design specifically poses to them as well, so that it's
Yeah.
easy to communicate it. Mm.
Yeah, exactly.
What do you think are the biggest challenges in industrial design currently, and how are we gonna work to overcome them?
Well, I think the biggest one we've already kind of talked about, it's sustainability.
Mm,
And how are we going to overcome that? I have no idea. I mean, I have some ideas. Like, I think we talked a little bit about regulation and it really has to be more of a systemic change. It can't just be sort of this grassroots thing. I think bigger companies need to start taking it more seriously and making it a part of their product offering. And some of them are. And hopefully people start making more responsible choices as well. But again, it can't just be that. It has to be sort of more top down change.
Yeah. Yeah, I think
Um,
as well it's bringing design into more of like a political level as well. I feel like that could have like bringing people with design thinking, like design ex-designers or people who are associated with designers into that level of governance so that they can make more systemic changes based on like our ideology.
yeah. Yeah. Another big thing that I think is an issue in design and has always been is diversity. I think at least in the US, the industrial design is overwhelmingly male and it's
Yeah.
overwhelmingly white males. And I was involved in the Industrial Designers Society of America Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council
Mm,
for about 2 years. And I did some data collection and analysis for them. And really, it's still a huge problem.
mm,
Um, and why is it a problem? Well, I think diversity in design is the diversity of thought is leads to better products and more inclusive products,
mm.
and more users needs can be met. So it's not just racial, it's also abled and differently abled or disabled. There's also designing for different age groups. I think diversity in the people who are doing the design
Mm.
is important for addressing these um, different groups and making sure that they're also getting some fair treatment in
Yeah.
terms of having products that are available to them and products that are useful to them.
Mm. Just a note on that. If there's any uh willing female designers out there who'd like to come on the podcast, please reach out. As I'm looking to I haven't even had a female designer on yet. This is the problem exactly. And I had someone lined up, and unfortunately she's on maternity leave, so she's too busy at the moment. So hopefully when she's done she can come on. But yeah, this is the issue, I suppose. We need to create diversity. Like 50% of the population, I don't know what the exact percentage is, are female. And like we don't even have any near that percentage of designers that are female. So how can we design successfully for females if we don't have any idea? You know?
Yeah. And actually, I think that is not true in some other design disciplines. Like I think in graphic
Yeah.
design or like design research,
Mm,
the proportion of female designers is much higher. So
mm,
there's something about industrial design that is not conducive to women being an equal part of the workforce. And
yeah.
we can speculate on what that is. Like, industrial design is kind of a boys club, and
Mm,
it's power tools and like, being in the shop and all that. But there's no reason that it can't be a welcoming environment for women.
yeah,
So
exactly.
I think I think that was something that we took very seriously at my last company at Bould Design. We tried very hard to have an equitable number of female designers. Like it
Mm,
wasn't, it wasn't 50-50 because the demographics of the industry are what they are, but I think it was pretty high compared
mm,
to most other working environments.
yeah. I think a big contributor as well is like even just the nature of the when you're learning as a child, like the male toys are Lego and all these toys that you have to build and construct and Meccano and whereas the female
Yeah.
toys are like Barbies where you put the clothes on the Barbie and I don't know, things like
Yeah.
that. So I suppose like from the beginning they're almost like preconditioned not to be industrial designers.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And yeah, I mean, it's something we're gonna have to work through because I think like even when you're saying from a form and visual perspective, like women have a really good eye for detail, and really like men are always inherently good at what's it called, like working out how things go together, probably because of these childhood toys. But there's like a real advantage of women in terms of form and like knowing what looks good to some degree. Like my girlfriend always comes over when I'm designing things and always goes like, you need to change this small detail, and it always has such an impact. And I feel like we should be working together as designers because the output would probably be so much better.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. We need to be working together. But I would also say that even those traits that you just mentioned are
Mm.
sort of
Yeah,
generalizations.
they're over
Like
general. Yeah,
that's
yeah.
not necessarily how men and women are different. Like men and women are different, but
Mm.
I've definitely worked with women who are good at putting things
Yeah.
together and like figuring out how things work. And I've
Mm.
also worked with men who have very strong sensitivity to details and form.
Mm.
So I think one of the things that we have to do is shed those preconceived notions about
Mm.
who's good at what
Yeah.
and just be open-minded about people as they are as
Mm.
talent and
Well,
designers.
and just complement each other as well in whatever way that is. Like just work together to complement each other. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it's going to be interesting in the future. I know there's a few agencies in Australia that have really worked to improve diversity, like Clandestine Design Group. They have a few very successful female designers, and yeah, it's going to be interesting to see the future. Um, what do you think the future of design looks like? Industrial design looks like? And there any new technologies that you see becoming integral? I know you already mentioned AI, but like what? Yeah, basically, how do you see industrial design in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, I think earlier we talked about the digital and physical experiences kind of melding together. I think that's
Mm.
going to keep happening. I think it really helps when industrial designers learn about digital design.
Mm.
Like, I'm not saying every industrial designer needs to also do digital design. Like, it's not, it's not that, it's just like every industrial designer doesn't also need to do engineering.
Mm.
It's just that you need to understand like what their workflow is and how you can work with them and how you can work together to provide a great user experience because at the end of the day your user doesn't care who
Mm.
did what. They don't care about the UI designer like cared about pixels and the industrial designer cared about atoms. They just care
Mm.
that the thing that they got actually works really well and there's
Mm.
not this like weird barrier between physical and digital. I think you can always tell when like those two disciplines didn't really talk to each other because like you can have like like cameras are a great example. Like digital cameras, they have mostly terrible UIs.
Mm.
Like even if the physical ergonomics are really great, but like the menu system is like totally garbage.
Mm.
It's obvious like these teams didn't really interact. And it was kind of like one thing was set, like one thing was prioritized, and then the other one was left to deal with it.
Mm.
So I think collaboration between physical and digital design is only going to hopefully get better. I think technologies, we've already talked about VR and AI and all that stuff. Probably 3D printing as well
Mm.
is going to be part of the future of design. Like 3D printers are just getting more and more affordable, and like there's more and more potential to be using them as manufacturing tools rather than just prototyping tools. And you see brands like Gantry, they make 3D printed lights.
Mm.
Like they're really starting to create products from 3D printed goods.
Mm.
And they're not just doing it to make prototypes. And there are many benefits to doing that. Like they don't have to keep things in stock. They don't have to have huge warehouses where they're just stocking bunch like tons and tons of
Mm.
lights. They can make stuff to order.
Mm.
Might not be as fast as like Amazon getting something next day or in 2 days, but
Mm.
you get something that's really unique or really beautiful, and you know it's more sustainable in that way because you're only making things that people actually want, and you're
Mm.
not. wasting tons of space, storing things, or tons of energy, transporting stuff around the globe.
Mm,
So I think that's an exciting development. Like, you know, 10 years ago when I was a 3D printing tech at my school, this would have been 15 years ago at this point. And like 3D printing was so unreliable and so expensive at that
mm,
point that it wasn't, you couldn't really see how this could ever be a useful technology beyond like 3D printing prototypes in a lab. But, you know, now you can get very good 3D printers for very little money.
mm. Yeah, it's really crazy how fast it's evolved. Mm.
Yeah.
What are some ethical considerations that you think designers should take when they create products going forward?
So I think one thing that I always try to think about is, does this need to exist and does
Yeah.
this align with my values? Like, do I want to be creating this? Like, if a client didn't approach me with this project, would it be something I do of my own accord?
Mm,
So, sometimes potential clients have um, approached me, like at my past company, to design something to do with weapons.
mm,
And that's not something that I think I want to work on. So we turned down that business. Um, sometimes we've been approached to design something, just things that are not in line with our values and we turn them away. So I think
mm,
that's always something, an ethical question that you have to ask yourself. Do you want to be part of bringing this into the world,
mm,
or do you not want to? And is it something that you're willing to just do for the money, or do would you feel okay with having put this out into the universe?
mm,
Um, another thing, there, as designers, there are things that you can influence, but you might not have a lot of say over. Like, of course, there's always things like the sustainability aspect, of course, like has ethical implications. Like the material has to come from somewhere. It ends up somewhere, usually in a country much poorer than where you're living.
mm,
Um, and I think those are hard questions. I don't have good solutions to them. Like, inherently certain making things is part of an inequitable system.
mm.
So
A
those
lot of
are,
the time,
yeah,
like
it's
a
hard
lot of the time, the systems
questions.
aren't even set up as well. Sorry to interrupt. Like the
Yeah.
system for example, one of the Neil was talking about how he's setting up sustainable resource systems in China. Because like for example, there's like specific resource he wanted to make his clients' products out of, but it wasn't even available in China because they just don't have the infrastructure for it. So he had to like basically set up that infrastructure so that there was a sustainable product material option. So it's like I suppose that's kind of like taking the next step to make these things happen. Like it isn't always easy, but like sometimes you actually have to go out of your way to establish that system.
Yeah. Yeah. If that's where your passion is, then definitely pursue it.
Mm. Yeah, it's really interesting. Just to finish up, what are some of the most important lessons that you've learned over the course of your career as an industrial designer, and what advice would you give to designers who are just starting out?
I posted this on LinkedIn at least once or twice, but I think the biggest lesson is, when you're just starting out, your job is to make someone else's job easier. And that's actually something my mom told me. And, if you're like a hotshot designer coming out of school and you think you know everything and, you're trying to impress everyone with your like skills, it can be hard for you to actually add value to an organization that you've just joined. when you have that mentality. But if you adopt a mentality of making yourself useful, helping, seeing, observing the work around you and
Mm,
seeing what it is people need help with, and they might not always be able to tell you. You might need to just observe and see for yourself,
mm,
and then offering to help in those ways. Eventually, people will start to see you as a valuable resource and they'll come to you with things that are more interesting, things that are more challenging,
mm,
and they'll hopefully teach you things along the way. But it all has to start with you taking an interest in other people and what their needs are. It's kind of like what we talked about before. Like, how do you get the job? You see what these companies need and you try and present yourself as a good option.
mm,
Even when you're in the company, you should try to observe what people need and try to make yourself a useful option. And that isn't always design work. Like, when I started out as an intern at Bould Design, I spent a day cleaning out the storeroom
mm,
because that's what needed to be done. And that's fine. Like, you're still doing it in the service of being part of a design studio.
mm,
But, if you approach, say you approach that task with like, oh, this is beneath me, like I don't want to do it. Like, I was paid to be a designer. I'm not, I didn't go to 4 years of design school to move boxes around. Like, people are going to notice if
mm,
you have that attitude and they're going
mm,
to probably not want to work with you as much.
mm,
So I think that's the biggest piece of advice. Go in with a good attitude and make yourself useful and try to make people's jobs easier.
mm. Yeah, really good advice. Oh, well, thank you, Anson. And yeah, I would recommend anyone, wanting some extra advice in industrial design, if whether you're a student or a seasoned professional, to check out his LinkedIn. I found it really, really interesting myself, and yeah, I think you will too. Thank you, and I hope you have a good day, mate.
Yeah, thanks so much, Roman. It's been great to be on.
Cheers, mate. Have a good one.